Hello everyone, it's Elisa from Moonstruck Vintage. For those of you who don't know me, I own a retail vintage store, a brick and mortar shop in Cleveland, Ohio's Little Italy neighborhood. I've been there for about 10 years and I've started this series of videos to talk about some of the behind the scenes of what I do to run my business. So in an earlier video, I talked about the fact that I sometimes list items online as well as have them in the shop. And the reason for that primarily is either the audience isn't there in my local neighborhood to find a buyer for that item, or maybe something's out of season, or perhaps it's just very unique and specialized and needs to be put online to find a greater audience. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what my process entails when I actually do put items online. So I'm coming to you today from my home photography studio, which is also known as my dining room. I prefer shooting my photos here and doing a lot of work here because the light is good. And, I have a basement studio, which I will show you one day, but I don't know. I just like to be able to see what's happening outside, see when the sun comes out, if it ever comes out again here in Cleveland. So I just like to have more above the ground time as opposed to below. But I do a lot of work in my basement, and I will show you that one day. But that's going to require a little cleaning up. But anyway, so today I'm going to talk to you, or at least start talking to you about my process. The very first thing I do is I decide what I'm going to actually start listing online. And I find my best approach is to batch items together that are very similar. So for instance, today I have a whole collection here of spring, summer blouses, button downs, tops that I want to list online. So ideally, this is the perfect time, right? Because we do anticipate spring is coming here soon, hopefully. And so this might be the time when people are starting to look for these type of items online. So what I do is I select the items and I try to pick things that are very similar. And I'll explain that to you in just a minute. But so the first step I do is I select my items. I make sure they're clean, pressed, and ready to be photographed because photographing items is my first step. So I do like to make sure they're all in great shape and that there isn't a lot of fussing around as I get ready to do this first step. And the first step is photography and taking pictures of items. So I select items that are similar, and that'll make it easier down the line when I'm listing. I make sure they're pressed, clean, and ready to be photographed. And then I start setting up my room where I'm going to be shooting, which is my dining room. And I'm going to show you just a little bit about that here in just a second. So I'll actually walk through it. So primarily today on this video, we're going to walk through the steps of taking photos of items I'm going to list online. And then the next couple of videos, I'll actually show you how I create the listings and the titles and how I actually promote those items when I list them online. So it's going to be a couple of videos to cover the entire process. The key thing today is batching these tasks together. So I tend to take photos first, and then I start the listing process. In between there, I do some measurements, so I have those all ready when I do um, the actual listing itself. So let's get started. Let me show you a little bit about where I take my photos and why I take them in this particular location. Here's a quick view of my dining room. Forgive the messiness. But this is really, like I said, where I do shoot some of my videos, and I also do my photography. The light in here happens to be great. And even though I do photograph things in my basement at times, I just find it's less of a fight to actually photograph things here. So you'll see a ring light here. You'll see my um, camera stand, tripod, and then over here you'll see a nice window and then a big hook on this white door. And this is where I take most of my videos. First and foremost, I do it here because, like I said, The light is very good, and I'm going to make it even better than it is right now. But I also like it because it tends to be a plain white background. And what we found is over time, and this is through reading articles and such, white backgrounds tend to help sell an item. It's not absolutely mandatory, but it does help considerably. And I'm not one to actually cut out the background. I know a lot of people do that. I just find that to be a lot of work. Okay, stay tuned as I set up my location. Hello. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this shade and I'm going to drop it, or I'm sorry, raise it. So the idea behind this is to get as much light as possible into this little corner space. Now, the light is a little harsh, so in order to soften it, I'm going to hang a curtain over it. And this is some of this lighting stuff I learned because I was a photographer, and these are just some little tips and tricks that help give you a better light, because most importantly, you want these photos on your listings to be really bright and easily seen with true colors. So I'll be right back. Getting my little box. I'm going to be using, in addition to this little sheer curtain, I'm going to be using these vintage curtain tacks, which were used back in probably the 30s, 40s to pull back your curtains. And of course, my neighbors are out next door, probably wondering what I'm doing. It's okay, they don't really care. I don't really care. So the nice thing about these little tacks is they just stick right into the woodwork, and it's just a little pinprick. But what it does is I still get lots of light from this particular window, but now the light is a little softer and less harsh. I also have my ring light, and I may still use my ring light. In fact, I probably will, because even though it's a little bit sunny right now, it's been dark because it's been raining on and off. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my ring light. I tend to like a really bright white, and I'm not going to point it directly at the item that's going to be on that hanger back there. I'm going to kind of bounce it off the wall, sort of off to the left of the item. And I'll talk to you about why I do that. So here's my first item, this adorable little 1960s blouse. You'll notice that I have this this kind of interesting little vintage wooden hanger. I tend to use this when I take my photographs, mainly because it just entertains me. Not a requirement. So the first thing I do is I hang the item on the hanger. Again, it's already cleaned and pressed and in great shape. Make sure the label is laying flat. And then I'm going to check my light. And I'll just move around my light a little bit here to make sure that it's not too harsh directly on the item, but it is filling in the shadows a little bit, which is very important. So now I'll be standing on the left of the ring light shooting, so I won't be blocking any light. So that's the primary setup here. And the reason I have all my other items close by, laying here right on the table, nice and laying flat. And so I should be able to go quickly through photographing each of the items quickly without having to move out of this little space right here. So hang on just a minute and I'll go to the next step. Okay, so next thing I'm going to show you here is in what position I'll be standing. Now, obviously, what we're seeing here is the curtain to the left and the busy wallpaper to the right. But when I'm actually shooting the picture, I use my iPhone, or any camera on any phone will work. And then I just make sure that I shoot it in square mode, square orientation, because most of these sites prefer that you shoot square. So when I go in to take the picture, I'm going to crop this in. So mostly all you'll see is the blouse and the white of the door. Now I know it's hard to imagine that right now, but I'm going to also include some photos here of what that will look like. So for the most part, I'm going to stand back, and I try to do this in the same order because I think that also makes the process very streamlined as well. So it's just a couple of steps and it should go really quickly. So I shoot the front of the item first from here, then I move in and I make sure to shoot any details. For instance, the collar, buttons, the fact that it's sleeveless. And once you come in closer, you do get a bit of a truer picture of the color of the item. So once I've shot those details, I also consider if there are any flaws with the item, because very often we sell items that are vintage and they have a little flaw here and there. So for example, if there was a missing button or a broken thread, I might zoom in and capture that as well. The next thing I do is I actually flip the item to the back, because a buyer online wants to see all sides, all the details, any flaws, etc. So I'll take a picture. Again, this would be in square orientation, and take a picture of the full back. Then I'll move in, capture some details of the print in particular, because I think that's really helpful for people. I might turn to the side or this side, just to get a little bit of a different view. Now, before I take the item off the wooden hanger and go to the next item, I measure it, measure the item, because I find like if I'm measuring it on the hanger, it's much more easy to get accurate measurements. And then I write them down, and when I go to list the items later, I already have those measurements taken. So that's one step off the list. So for example, I typically measure armpit to armpit to get a chest measurement. Now I don't do all the way to the absolute edge of the item. I do leave a little bit, maybe like a half an inch on either side, just to allow for ease, okay? And ease just means there's just, you're not exactly going to fit into that item so it's skin tight, but sometimes you'd like to have a little extra room. So this allows for ease. So it allows for a little extra room. So when you're reading measurements online, that's really important. So people don't wear their clothes skin tight, generally speaking. So in this case, this item measures from armpit to armpit 17 inches. So I'm going to go to my pen, wherever I left that. One moment, please. Not surprisingly, under a pile of clothing, but I found it. So I'm going to write on my little clipboard right here. And normally I have a sheet that's already lined and has headings on it, but I'm just going to show you real quick. The item is the 60s purple sleeveless. And I'm going to make a column header, chest, and then I will follow everything else on the list. So since it measured out armpit to armpit at 17 inches, I'm going to double that and make it 34 inches. Now remember, that's not to the edge. That's leaving probably about 2 inches of ease on either side of that measurement. The next measurement I'm going to do, and keep in mind I do this because vintage items, you can't go by the size on the label. It's just impossible, because even today, every manufacturer's sizing is different. But back in the day, in the 1960s, measurements were even way more different. So you need to provide measurements for these items online unless you want to be constantly badgered with questions. So the idea is to minimize the questions that you get. So if you provide the right information, then you're going to, save yourself some time going forward. So the length, I'm adding a column header for length, is 24 inches. I already forgot. Wait a minute. And I just kind of measure from the middle of the shoulder down to the hem, 25 inches. Now, in this case, I could go ahead and measure the waist also. That might be of interest to some people. But it's the same as the bust because it is kind of a straight shape. But I am going to write it down just in case. Typically, it's not necessary. But it also measures at 34 inches. Okay, so that's done. Next step is this really adorable Hawaiian shirt. Again, probably from the 80s or 90s. I'm just going to take it off of its white hanger. Hang it on our wooden hanger. Take a quick look at it. Make sure the buttons are buttoned. This one I might have steamed a little bit more just so it laid a little bit more flat. But overall, it's fine. On to the next. Okay, we're back on our phone. We're shooting in a square orientation. We're taking a full-length picture. We're stepping up. We're taking a picture of the label, the details of the neckline, the fact that it's short sleeve, some close-ups of the pattern, and done. I flip the shirt around, take a full-length picture, come in again, take some close-ups of the colors, the pattern, make sure there are no flaws. If there are, I capture those in their own photo. We'll finish this one off by measuring the chest length and waist. So armpit to armpit, accounting for ease. This one's about 40 inches. This is 80s red Hawaiian. Then we're going to get the length. Mid shoulder to the hem, it's 28 inches. And then the waist. Waist, now when I say waist, I'm trying to estimate where a waist would fall on this particular shirt, but it's not going to be exact. The main reason I'm measuring the waist, or what I'm calling the waist, is because, some people might be wider in that area and they would like to know if the shirt can be buttoned. So it's important. It's an important item to kind of identify. Now this one happens to be a little bit more wide at the bust, and I already forgot what the measurement was. And it's about 30, it was 40 at the bust and 38 at the waist. So that's probably going to be useful information to someone who would like the shirt, but would like to make sure that it's going to button around their waist area. Okay, so it's not exactly the waist, but you get the idea. It's going to give you an idea of the silhouette of the item. Okay, cool. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what the process is when I'm taking photographs of these items. So the first step, just to review, is I pick out like items. You'll notice that the 3 items that I was photographing today are all spring summer blouses, button-up blouses, short sleeve, sleeveless with bold patterns. And I'm going to show you later on, and probably in the next video, how that's helpful when you're going to list. Because you can literally you can create one listing and then make a copy of it and just edit it with the new information for the next blouse. It just makes it so much more streamlined. So select like items, make sure they're pressed and cleaned. I try to keep them hung because then I don't want to have to press and clean them again. So that's just a little tiny step that you can do that kind of helps you stay prepared. And then I hang it on the cute wooden hanger. I make sure that the lighting is appropriate, the best I can do. Now there might be some slight editing that goes on once I have the photos on my phone. A lot of times I just need to be brightened. The key is to try to get the colors as true as possible and bright enough so people can see the detail. So I check the lighting. I drop the blind on my window. I put up the sheer curtain to soften the light. I set my um, uh, I set my light. I set my ring light to a bright white, which is what I prefer. I don't directly point it at the item, but I try to bounce it off either a nearby wall or the ceiling, just so it again softens that light, makes it more even overall. So once the light is set, then I stand next to the ring light and I shoot full length front, close up of the label if there is one, close up of any collar detail, pocket detail, button detail, sleeves, anything that is unique, close up of the pattern, and then any flaws there might be. And I just try to make it as clear as possible. If there is a flaw, give it its own picture. And that's very important because a lot of times people will buy a flawed item that's vintage, but they don't want to be surprised by what the flaw is. And then I flip it over, take a full length of the back, and I get a couple more close-ups of the pattern and the colors, standing side to side, making sure the light is hitting appropriately to give us true colors. And then once that's done, I take my clipboard and I do 3 measurements on these particular items. I do the chest, the waist, and the length. So from mid-shoulder to the bottom of the hem. And I jot those down on my little clipboard so that when I do go to actually create the listing online on Etsy or eBay or both, I have all the information ready and at my fingertips. So that's sort of the first couple of steps that I follow when I'm getting ready to list items online. Now, once you leave me, I'll be going through and photographing the rest of these items. Again, all very similar in style and season. So I think that just helps me with the steps, making more streamlined. So that's it for today. The next video, I'm actually going to show you how I create the listings on Etsy. I usually always start with Etsy, and then sometimes I will also list them on eBay, but Etsy is my primary listing place for my vintage clothing in particular. So I'll show you that next. So thanks so much for joining me today in my dining room studio. I hope this has been helpful. Please leave any comments below on maybe some tips that you use when you're doing photographs for listings online, or if this is something that interests you. So thanks again. Bye-bye.